countries like Austria, for example, started to look for the resources. So all this process was necessary to conclude with the Council recommendations hammered out by Minister Burton, and also the European Council decision to propose a specific youth employment initiative with 6 billion euros, which we know is an additional sum. It's supposed to be a top-up to all other resources, which is the social fund and the national resources, but it also highlights the need to focus on the social fund and ensure that on the EU level there is a clear allocation for the social fund in the MFF, because otherwise it's more difficult to see whether the youth employment initiative is additional or not. There have been, of course, some discussions about the length of the period which should be, so to speak, tolerated, and there were discussions about the composition of the measures which should be agreed on to be offered for the unemployed young people. But I think the seriousness of this discussion just signals that everybody took it very seriously, that there is a need for serious and urgent intervention. And as soon as the agreement was reached in Council, we started a new cooperation between public employment services. I can refer to an excellent seminar which was hosted by the German Minister, Frau von der Leyen, in Berlin, with the participation of Austria, Sweden, as well as France. And we would like to widen this circle as soon as possible in order to facilitate a transfer of good practices and know-how from countries where the achievements speak for themselves and where there is definitely already a good practice which can be shared. There is, as I pointed to this in the context of Cyprus, there is clearly an excellent cooperation between the employment portfolio and the regional and urban policy portfolio, which means the social fund and the regional development fund. We believe the new regulations which the Commission proposed facilitate a better combination of these funds. We know from the feedbacks that in many countries there were difficulties if there was an intention to combine these funds and other EU funds. I believe this time the regulations were developed in a better way with more cooperation between these portfolios, and this cooperation will also benefit the implementation of the employment policies as well. Thank you.
Minister Barton, would you like to respond to any of the questions?
Yes. First of all, just in relation to what was said by the speakers from Sweden, from Austria and Germany, I think that the model that exists in a number of countries of having very strong links with employers in relation to training, so that the commitment to training involves not just education, but it also develops and builds up a connection to employers, is really important. I think the public employment services of the different European countries have a critical role to play in this, because in my experience as Social Protection Minister, dealing with social welfare and dealing with people who are unemployed, you may have job vacancies in a country, but if a sufficient number of those job vacancies in a country don't go to the people who are on the live register, you may actually have a strong feeling that certain sectors are doing well, but the people who are unemployed are not making any advancement to take part in those employment opportunities. And that's why I do think that certainly in Ireland, where we do have a tradition up to the time of the crash of quite strong social partnership, I do think that the role of the employers and of the trade unions, the role of the social partners, is critical in developing a framework which widens out opportunity. I think the other thing that we have to think about is that certainly in Ireland, more than 50% of people go on to some form of third level. But the thing is that third level is not for everybody. Not everybody wants to go on to college and university, and certainly I think the challenge is to provide opportunities for young people who at 18 or 19 may not want to go to university, that they have a pathway as well in relation to their to developing training and qualifications. And then if they're in their middle 20s or they're older, and at that point they want to perhaps get more formal university type qualifications, that we have a ladder of opportunity and that we have different roads leading to that ladder. I think that it's very important that there's a vision in the European Union that young people, it's not just their future, it's our future, and that we have an expectation of participation in society. So what was referred to by our Austrian colleague of people drifting out and then perhaps migrating and just perhaps not being very focused on what they want to do, I think that's important. In relation to our colleague from Cyprus, I think the critical issue here for European economies is how do we stimulate sufficient demand. I mean, in Ireland, for instance, we have sectors of the economy which do very well, like foreign direct investment, because we have a very large supply of very skilled labour. But even that is not sufficient for the demands of those particular industries. So we then have the domestic economy, and our difficulty in terms of the financial crash is frankly that we do not have sufficient domestic demand in the economy, and of course this is a problem for other countries which have similar difficulties to Ireland. Of course that's compounded by the fact that if you're in a programme, your object is to get out of the programme in a structured way within a very reasonable time frame. But to do that you have to have lenders who are willing to lend to you at reasonable rates. But I should say, in relation to the crisis in Ireland, we have a very large voluntary organisation in Ireland linked to the Vincentians, called the Society of St Vincent de Paul. They have 10,000 members in this country and they're heavily involved in social programmes. Last weekend was the 200th anniversary of the birth of their founder, a man from Milan called Charles Osnaman. And I mean, the point about the European Union is that 200 years ago, people who are into European history will know that Napoleon was at war in Europe, and the great achievement of the European Union has been to bring that to an end. But the crises that some countries are experiencing are of the same level of difficulty. They're economic crises rather than violent crises, but they risk having the same, if you like, similar outcomes in relation to the strain and the suffering of people. So I do appreciate what our colleague from Cyprus is talking about, but I do think that if we can have a programme of active stimulation of domestic economies, we can actually see growth in Europe. It's a difficulty for Ireland, frankly, that growth in the rest of Europe, in many countries, has now become sluggish. And I have to say, I was interested to see that Reinhardt and Roghoff, who wrote the famous paper about the level of sustainability of debt in relation to government borrowing, that the Excel spreadsheet that they used had some fundamental errors. So I think we're all in a learning position in relation to this at the moment.
All right, thank you, Minister. Okay, I'm going to take all, there's 9 more questions. I'm going to take them all because I'm just conscious of the time. So if the 2 speakers would keep a note of all the questions. So the next speaker is from Greece, and it is Mr. Konstantopoulos. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know that in Greece we are undergoing a recession for the 6th consecutive year, with a shrinking economy by 25%, with unemployment by 27.6%, and especially youth unemployment under 25 years of age amounting to 60%, despite improving work costs per product unit. Allow me at this point to refer to the Commissioner's, Mr. Laszlo Andor's words. He said the poorer are the ones to be affected the most. And above all, more solidarity is needed, both in the area of individual member states and among them. Only if we stick together, we will be able to overcome the crisis. I believe that we all understand that it's impossible for any Western society to tolerate either youth unemployment of 60% or total unemployment of 27%. The marginalization of large parts of the Greek population is impressive. Curbing unemployment is a top priority for the Greek government. Greece intends to ask for national strategic reference framework funding, transferring from structural funds to the European Social Fund, in order to provide the means for a major intervention towards unemployment curbing. We must accept the basic fact that in order to improve the competitiveness of the European South member states, the European North member states should either accept or recycle the benefits they received from the crisis towards the European South member states. For example, this can be performed through the European Investment Bank or through direct investments in the countries of the South.
Speaker, I'm going to ask you to conclude. If you can wrap up now, if you can conclude your remarks.
Or by accepting debt reduction, which was the case for Greece last November, or by accepting higher inflation rates than the Eurozone average, or any combination of the above. Mr. President, all the aforementioned have not yet been accepted by the Eurozone. However, it is sensible and wise. The academic analysis clearly points towards this direction. Otherwise, I am afraid that the Eurozone architecture will be jeopardized and social tensions will escalate to a point of danger not only for certain countries, but for Europe's core as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Speaker. The next speaker is Mr. Steindl from Austria.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, the dual vocational training system has proven its worth over the decades in Austria. We have a high youth employment rate, but also high productivity and a good citizen welfare as a result. We've had to adjust our dual vocational training system, and in the future there will have to be guidance and advice on vocational training choices in the primary school system to help people make choices. It's important for Austria that we have a good feed through to the secondary schools and make sure that people can be advised in their career choices. This will impact on our productivity, but also we need to see the same happen across Europe. There are challenges for entrepreneurs who want to train people in the vocational training stream. There's a high cost, about €50,000 per vocational training place. So my question to Commissioner Andor, would it be possible for those who are making investments in such vocational training places to support these entrepreneurs in their efforts? Thank you.
Speaker is Ms. Barres from the European Parliament. Chairperson.
Madam Chairman, Commissioner, Minister, you know that since July 2010, the European Parliament has been asking for a youth guarantee system, and we're very happy that this has happened, despite the fact that it's under the pressure of the situation. Now, the European Parliament has submitted 3 requests in the negotiations that are upcoming. First of all, the age of 30 years should be taken into account for young graduates. Then, second point, the region should be considered.
Can you correct the time?
The second request is that the regions should be considered to have a level of 20, as soon as the level of unemployment is 20%, not 25%. And then third point, this is an emergency measure in structural policies, and this should be dealt with in the form of front-loading, because these issues have to be dealt with very urgently. Now, Madam Minister, you said that there is this youth guarantee which is operating successfully. Well, it's based on social dialogue, structured, fruitful social dialogue, and we think that is the spirit within which we must lead this initiative on 2 fronts. So, as well as the macroeconomic imbalance we have, youth unemployment is also creating a huge imbalance. And so this is why these things have to be tackled in the specific country recommendations, but also when it comes to national parliaments, to ensure that all of this can be implemented. And that's the spirit of the Conference of Presidents, which took place in Nicosia last week, Article 13 of the Fiscal Pact. And I think we have to work together so that this governance in social spheres becomes just important as economic governance. Now, final point to you, Madam Minister. In the European Parliament, we are convinced that this youth guarantee is a very good news, but it has to be implemented in the way that I've just mentioned, but also member states have to take this into account. They can't say they're winning when it comes to the youth unemployment situation. This is going to be accompanied by structural funds, 6 billion, 3 billion on the European Structural Fund, but they have to, at the same time, support the idea of 25% of cohesion policy funds also being used for this purpose. Turkey, thank you.
I'd like to congratulate the Irish presidency for the organization of this meeting, and I would like to thank all the Irish people for their hospitality. Turkey's unemployment rate fell to 9.2% in 2012, as it was Turkey's lowest unemployment rate since 2005. 10 out 17 Eurozone members suffered a higher rate than Turkey, according to data from Eurostat and the IMF. Turkey welcomes the efforts of the EU to reduce youth unemployment and to increase the youth employment rate in line with the wider EU targets of achieving a 75% employment rate for the working age population 20 to 64 years. Within this framework, 6 billion euros earmarked for the struggle against youth unemployment and the establishment of a Europe-wide training guarantee program under the multi-annual financial framework will contribute to this goal. These initiatives require to be consolidated with common public debt management and joint combat against the loan interest rate gap. which is often widening due to speculation so as to increase the scope for investments. Turkey's successful economic performance, young population, qualified and competitive labor force, liberal and reformist investment climate, highly developed infrastructure advantages, geographic position, low tax rates and incentives, and large domestic market, as well as customs union with the EU since 1996, provide ample opportunity for foreign investment, which will contribute to youth unemployment. Thank you.
Sorry, the next speaker is from Austria. It's Mr. Perhab.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps I could pick up on what Commissioner Andor was saying. The youth guarantee for 25-year-olds too late. We look at 15-year-olds in school, and we try, when they're in compulsory schooling, to harness the talents of our youth and perhaps use that in the vocational training scheme. So that's perhaps what we need to look at for the future, looking at tackling youth unemployment. Companies in Austria train or are very much involved in vocational training. 20% in industry, 10% in public jobs. It's a kind of a drop feed approach. But what's crucial for young people is that they have an opportunity to access the labour market. But this partial success because we have a lack of certain skills or trades in Austria. So it's not a 100% success. We still have improvements that can be made domestically as well. We're all aware that youth unemployment of 20, 30, 40, 50% is a ticking social time bomb. Thank you.
The next speaker is Miss O'Cahan, or Baroness O'Cahan from the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you again for your hospitality and for such an interesting opening session. I've just three brief questions. First of all, at Commission level, and this is addressed to Mr. Andor, at Commission level, is there an exchange of practical steps being taken by all Member States? Because by pooling the practical steps, one would think that there would be probably some merit for it in Member States. Secondly, is the funding transfer from the social fund effective and rapid? And the reason I'm asking that is we've done a study, which will be published, actually a report published tomorrow, about research and innovation, and we have found that there are blockages in the relationship between the Commission and the people who receive funds. And thirdly, for Ireland particularly, and this is addressed to Ms. Burton, sorry. Have you got, yesterday afternoon, I met a most enthusiastic young lady who had a degree in architecture, had been unemployed for 18 months after leaving the university, who she said never thought that she would ever be unemployed, getting a degree in architecture. And for the last 11 months or so has been employed by a group of 4 people who were laid off during the construction industry, again in architectural. They've now built up the practice, and she's now fully employed in that area, and her enthusiasm was amazing. And I think Lucy would be a real role model for many of the people here in Ireland, and I'll give you all her details if you want them afterwards. Thank you.
The next speaker is from Latvia. It's Mr. Asser Adams. Mr. Adams.
Good morning. I welcome today's discussion on strategies to combat youth unemployment, which brings risk of social exclusion and other negative consequences for young people and for whole European society. Regarding Latvian policymakers' reaction on Commission's youth guarantee initiative was cautious at the beginning because wording warranty made us really nervous regarding potential costs and, in reality, achievable goals. Later, we became quite enthusiastic when, during analysis phase, we had found out that such program does not only help for combating unemployment in general, but will become as an important instrument to create significant reduction in outbounding migration from country too. The main problem in Latvia still is youth neither in employment nor in education or training, so-called needs. Therefore, we focus our efforts on low-skilled youth under 25 and their return to education system. At the same time, Latvia continues to implement and adjust other active labour market policy measures for youth. With all these efforts, we have managed to reduce the youth unemployment rate from peaking 42% in 2010 to 28% in 2012, and we hope for much better results in 2013. The discussion of the situation of young people and proposed policy measures should include dealing with all potential obstacles accessing good quality job, education or training. We should take into account that positive results can be expected only with involvement of all relevant stakeholders, including social partners and all kinds of youth organizations. Even though there are no immediate solutions to unemployment, the overall employment situation steadily improves together with growth and improvement of macroeconomic situation. Nevertheless, activation of workforce remain important, including training in future professions with high potential employability. In developing framework for implementation of youth guarantee, there must be more focus on simplification of monitoring procedures. In order to achieve best possible results, we all have to do our homework, Member States, Commission services, as well as young people.
Next speaker is Mr. Phil Flanagan from Northern Ireland.
Early, Oireachtas a chorú bheith anseo New Live, tá mé ansáta a bheith anseo Live. Personally, I'd like to welcome the introduction of the Youth Guarantee Scheme, but it can only be considered a first step to resolving this crisis, because the Youth Guarantee Scheme will not create jobs for our young people, and that is what's at the core of this issue. In the part of Ireland that I represent, a significant proportion of under-25s are highly skilled or even educated to a degree level, and they're completely unable to get a job because so few are actually available in that area. And as you'll all know, what's coming out of that is then another crisis through emigration. Offering such people who are highly skilled and highly educated continued education and apprenticeship or traineeship is not the solution to this crisis. All this scheme that's currently being talked about will do is offer subsidised labour to employers who often will be multi-million profit-making firms to put people into jobs that actually already create. So what they're getting is subsidised labour. That's not a solution to any crisis. It's my view that the scale of the reaction to this problem is not proportionate to the extent of the problem. It's been estimated the annual cost of youth unemployment to the European economy is €153 billion. €6 billion has been put into this scheme, as is proposed to be put into this scheme between 2014 and 2020. So there is much more that needs to be done. So I suppose the clarity I would like is around the aspect that I see missing from the priorities, or the one that was left last in the Minister's list, and that's about encouraging job creation. Can I ask what steps are being taken to facilitate the creation of actual jobs for our young people across the EU, which would actually guarantee young people rights to qualified, adequate, paid and stable employment?
It's Mr. Flanagan, and the final speaker is Mr. Francois Brottes from France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Une question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A very short question to Commissioner Andor. What is the effect of later retirement of workers on youth unemployment? That is to say, is it a good idea to delay retirement age for workers during a time of crisis?
It's very short and sweet. Okay, I'm going to start this time around with Minister Joan Burton to respond to the questions.
First of all, I think one of the themes, again from our Austrian colleagues and from others, is the need, I think, for both strong social partnership in relation to the development of courses. And I think what's interesting about the Austrian example is pushing it down into primary and secondary school level, where people look at career choices that help them to subsequently find employment. And I think perhaps that that's one of the key issues, that it should be employment focused, that we want a strong general education for people, but we also want people to be looking to how can I become financially independent by being employed, or indeed being self-employed, being entrepreneurial, when eventually I leave education. And that we would have two pathways, one for people who are taking essentially the vocational road, and the other for people who are taking a university road. And I think the example which was given by Baroness O'Cahan of the young architect she met, and indeed our colleague from Northern Ireland, they're talking in many ways about the same thing. We, in a lot of countries in Europe now, and in Ireland specifically, there's a very, if you like, proud figure, which is that we have 50% or more people participating in third level education. And that is a very, very significant achievement, not just for the country, but for those young people and for their families. However, it's not for everybody, and I think we need to recognise that and to have pathways which incorporate both. Listening to Baroness O'Cahan about the architect, I suspect that she had been on an internship, the internship scheme that we've set up, which to date about 16,000 people have taken part in, and we're publishing a study on it tomorrow, undertaken by Indicon, which shows, as I said, the placement rate of between 50 and 60%. Because people have to recognise, and if there are people here who've been employers or HR managers, if you're offered people at an interview, and some people have relevant work experience and other people have none, and most difficult of all, you see on the CV that they've been out of work for 1 year or 2 years, guess who's actually going to get the job? The person who has the gap on their CV of being out of employment for a long time is not the person most likely to successfully get the job. So I think from that point of view, there's a lot of further cooperation that the European Public Employment Services can do, so that we look at best practice in different countries. And I think that has to be localised. If you're going to offer a job, say in the north of England, the most likely takers for that job will be people living in that region. So I think the services have to be very directed and very localised. And Oireachtas Marialer era sé an fibe is mó nadini óga atá gan obair agus Marialer an Oireachtas, we have plans to invest very significantly in stimulus programs. Now, I think the European Investment Bank has a role to play in that, but people will know that the rules and conditionality of the European Investment Bank require essentially a AAA type rating, and that for countries which are in a programme or which are in economic difficulty is obviously extremely difficult to achieve. I won't comment in detail on the employment problems of Northern Ireland, but what we do have in the north is we had a very, very strong tradition, particularly in the Protestant and Unionist community, of trade-based education, particularly for young men. For a variety of reasons, a lot of that employment has left the north of Ireland, and many of those young men no longer, and indeed now young women, no longer have those avenues of training that were once available to them in the very big employments in the north of Ireland. Instead, we have in the north of Ireland a very large public sector and a very large public sector services sector. But again, the services sector, whether public or private, particularly in the care area, is a very important important and growing area of employment demand right around Europe, because we have ageing populations and we have a strong interest in people having care facilities. So I do think, you know, looking at labour markets, having strong social partnership, having public investment policies which involve employing young people on those public investment schemes, you know, there is no one solution that is going to fit all situations, but to me it's always a series of different pathways and ladders that allow different people at different levels, different interests to participate.
Mr. Under.
I will try to be similarly fast-speaking, but there's so many questions on the table and so many details, to be honest. But let me start by saying that I'm very glad to see there is a consensus about what the youth guarantee actually means and why it is so important. This is indeed a response to the ticking social time bomb, which exists in many countries, as the representative from Austria said, and depending on the concrete situation of particular member states, indeed this can also connect with the specific challenges like the outward migration in the case of Latvia. This is the country which I will visit, and also the Parliament in June, early June, so I will be very happy to continue the discussion on the same subject and the wider context. I think there is also a very important clarification from the colleague from Northern Ireland, because indeed the youth guarantee is in a way a continuation of the employment strategy of the EU that has existed in the last 15 years, but it's also a change, because for quite some time there was a prevailing paradigm for the employment policies of the Commission, particularly under the expression of the flexicurity, which wanted to promote simultaneously flexibility, which is very much needed for business at the time of the globalization, but also employment security. Now, we had to acknowledge that this has been very, very imbalanced, because there is a lot of move towards flexibility, much less towards the security of employment. In fact, the youth guarantee is a very concrete measure for a critical age group where it is really justified to establish the security of employment, because the cost of not doing so would be excessively high for the individuals, for the economy and the society as a whole. It's not the only measure to boost employment and job creation. But I'm not going into the details, because 1 year ago the Commission adopted a specific employment package, which overall in the context of the entire economy explored what can be done and what needs to be done for promoting job creation, not only in general terms like measures to boost the demand for labour, but also in more concrete sectoral approaches to identify in which sectors the job creation is the most hopeful and should be anticipated and worked on. This is also linked to another Commission initiative which is about a new industrial policy. Perhaps there have been less discussions on this in the last 1 year. This comes from the Vice President, Mr. Tajani, and this also is extremely important if we want to promote job creation and a sustainable economic development at the same time. Now, let me just leave this here and let me respond to the questions from the European Parliament, because I think this go into some very concrete details, but for me it's also an opportunity to clarify what, at least from our side, the policy objective is. There were 3 questions about the age limit, the eligibility of regions, and a question of front loading. To be frank, I have very different levels of enthusiasm for the three proposals. I would be very much inclined to work on the basis of front-loading, because we have a very severe crisis, and the intervention is necessary now. Hopefully, towards the middle and particularly the end of the financial period, the situation would ease, but now we would need to press the accelerator as much as possible. I'm less enthusiastic about shifting the age limit to 30, simply because first we would need, first we very much need to test this model in a very concrete age group in the context of school-to-work transitions. And of course, if it works, and if it works everywhere, we can think about widening the concept, but I think we can spend the next few years by implementing what has already been agreed on among the ministers. And similarly, especially because the 6 billion is simply a top-up, I would very much hesitate to change the regional eligibility towards the 20% threshold, because it would, so to speak, shift towards equality among unequals. And I think the situation in the regions where the youth unemployment is excessively high, more than one quota of those on the labour market. Of course, it's not the same as the quota of the age group, it's the quota of those on the labour market. We, in my view, should focus on this, but to be honest, the gap between 20 and 25 is not that enormous. Concerning the practical steps, the question from the UK House of Lords, we have already identified all the existing programs of the 27 member states within the youth employment package, in order to clarify what is the starting point in the EU, in the member states, where the governments can start building from. So the staff working documents attached to the youth employment package include the summaries of the existing practices. In some countries it exists on the national level. I can point to Slovenia, where I visited recently, and the social fund actually supports a nationwide scheme. It's not a guarantee, but there is a nationwide network which is accessible in all parts of the country, and the program can be built on this. Or some countries in a regional level, nobody has spoken from Italy, but the region of Tuscany, from ESF support, is running an excellent program which is called the Giovani C, and this is also a basis which we consider a basis for building a youth guarantee on. And since adoption in Council, of course, my services have started to work also on more practical level with the public employment services to see...
Commissioner, I'm going to ask you to make your concluding remarks, if that's okay.
My concluding remark is that we continue to work on these details. This also, of course, necessitates, if justified or if it's relevant, the better use of the ESF. The country experience is very diverse in terms of the speed and the quality of the ESF use. But we need to work on it together, because it doesn't work out if only the Commission invests in it, but the Member States themselves, where it is relevant. I'm sure they are aware which countries I speak about. It's important. And then, of course, no time to respond to the question from Greece. But I already mentioned that this problem on a bigger perspective, of course, is linked to the systemic weaknesses of the monetary union, and I will be able to continue this conversation in Athens at the end of June when I'm visiting Greece, and perhaps we meet again. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Commissioner. So I would like to thank our two speakers, the Commissioner and also the Minister, for their very informative presentations, and also to thank the delegates for their contributions this morning. I'm now going to suspend the meeting, but before we have our coffee break, I would like to invite the chairpersons from each chamber in the Parliaments to join myself and my colleagues in the lobby for a family photo. Thank you for your cooperation, and just to say as well that the next session will start promptly at 11:15. Okay. 11. Sorry, at 11. 11. Sorry, 11.
to talk.